I'm a man of few words. I've got a 100-day program ahead of me in the UK, and now I want to formally introduce and formally hand over the reins to Christina Rogstad, who is going to take over and take our vision to the next level.
I was married and divorced and had a 2-year-old child by the time I was 19 years old and no high school education. When I grew up, I wanted to be an oceanographer. I had the idea I was going to be the next Jacques Cousteau. Well, you don't do a lot of Jacques Cousteauing when you've got a little one. So I very quickly then decided that a business degree would be what would help me get through and raise my family. And I think the thing that really made the difference for me was education. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So I have organized companies, I've run companies, I've done consulting, I've worked and run teams of 3 people up to close to 1,000 people. So I hope to package up that expertise and bring this to RealStew. This is what we're going to execute on the next 100 days. And one of the big drives for us is going to be driving revenue. And that becomes exponential. Once we drive that over the next 100 days, the next 100 days and the next 100 days after that becomes easier and easier and easier. And one of the mechanisms we're going to use to do that is vertical marketing, where we can be really successful, where we know we've got a product that there is a big need for. We can then own that vertical. Real estate is the one we're looking at as first off the rank, so that we can then go to other places and say, well, in New Zealand, we own 85% of the real estate market. And then how can we look at similar verticals? So we're building the underlying platform in a really smart way.
That ability to be able to stand here in front of you all, for us all, to say, welcome, welcome, welcome.
The next one is improve our systems. We've all read about organizations that grow very quickly and they ignore systems. And what happens when the growth? The thing falls apart. We're not going to do that. Business planning. Again, we're growing up as an organization and we now need to look at how do we plan and what kind of business plan do we have over the next 6 months, 12 months, 3 years. And communications. Go figure. We're a communications company. We need to find out how we best communicate ourselves before we start telling other people. We've got a fantastic team. I don't know if any of you have ever read this book or know this particular team dynamic called forming, storming, norming, and performing. Well, we've had a bit of forming, we've had a little bit of storming, but now we need to move on to the performing. So over the next 100 days, this team's going to get to know each other even better. We're going to be learning how to get the best out of each other, how best to communicate with each other, and how best we can drive our goals. So those are what our next 100 days are going to look like, because when we come back here in 100 days, we're going to tell you how we did. And you're going to be amazed. This is my mom, the most fantastic woman I've ever known. This was the last birthday she had before she died. 97. 97 years old. She wrote a book called What a Ride, and the preamble to the book was just what's up there. And that's how she lived her life. She was an amazing woman. I was working for a company called Convatec a few years ago, and one of the ladies there, Raywin, put her head in the door one day and said, can you give a speech up in Walkworth next month? I said, yeah, sure, not a problem. And a couple of weeks later I said, Raywin, when is that and what am I talking about? And she said, oh, it's next week and you're talking about the meaning of life. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? So I do what every executive does. I called my mother. I said, Mother, what do I do? And she said, that's not a problem, Chris. You just tell them about the magic. And I thought, of course, tell them about the magic. So I went and I talked to this group, and these were all chronically ill people. And I said, my mom told me, and I do as my mother says, that I must tell you about the magic. So I want this group to know about the magic. And the magic for me was the first time I went fishing in New Zealand. And I was down at Port Waikato and I was on the river. And I pulled in this fish and it was like, wow, that's magic. And I remember the first time I heard Patty talk. And I sat down there in Paddington's and I listened and I thought, wow, we really can change the world. That was magic. And I remember when my youngest granddaughter was quite little and we were walking down the beach, and she took my hand and she looked up at me with these big, gorgeous, intelligent blue eyes, and she said, "I love you, Grandma." That is magic. So when we go through this next 100 days and the next 100 days and the next 100 days, remember that we're going to improve our communications, we're going to drive revenue, we're going to increase our systems, we're going to build a really strong team, and we're going to have a fantastic business model, but never, ever forget the magic. Here we go.